In this day and age, many people work in jobs that they don't actually like that much. And understandably, work is often seen as a necessary evil to put food on the table and pay the bills. I can certainly count myself lucky though that I've always enjoyed hands-on work and have been able to build a life that mostly takes place in workshops. And every time I meet other tinkerers, they tell me that they don't want to ever leave the workshop and that it is their happy place. And of course, yours truly is a prime example of that. But over the course of the past few years, I have also learned that I also really enjoy being out in the world exploring. Of course, that encompasses being on the hunt for cool equipment and historic items, but I also really like exploring abandoned places and also just being out in nature. Another thing that I should have done more in the past though is to actually meet interesting people and build friendships and alliances on an international level. After all, I've been producing videos in English for almost 9 years now, and people from all around the world have been following me on this journey. In order to meet some of you guys, as well as some fellow tinkerers and YouTube creators, I embarked on a trip to the UK about 3 weeks ago. The plan was to also produce an entire episode about that trip. Well, and everything seemed to work out as planned. I had a great time in Birmingham and Nottingham for about 5 days. And after that, I took a train to Southampton to continue my trip in the south of England. Waking up with a fever during my first night there, I had to realize though that I had fallen ill and was forced to isolate for the rest of my 2-week stay. The remainder of my stay was basically me in my hotel room. My only physical activity was my daily walk to the western shore. Being sick while traveling is not fun at all. But all things considered, the tranquility and peace of that beautiful seashore helped me with my recovery. Within a week I had recovered alright, but it also meant back to Germany and back to square one. Because I hadn't been able to produce the video I wanted to make about the trip. And upon my arrival, about 1 week ago, I continued where I had left off, with repairing some high-quality scrapyard finds. And the centerpiece of today's video will be this massive faceplate that I found at one of the scrapyards. Since it fits very well, we will also take a look at a number of 3-jaw chucks that I found. Furthermore, we will take care of some high-quality German military surplus gear in this episode as well. So let's get going then. So let's have a look at this faceplate then. Or maybe let me explain what a faceplate is in the first place and what I intend to do with it. See, when working with a lathe, you will usually have a chuck installed at the headstock of the lathe, and in many cases that will be a classic 3-jaw chuck like this one here. However, when you take a look at old pictures like in this German machine tool catalog from 1928, you will see that they often used chucks with 4 jaws that actually look more like a faceplate to me. This old training book shows a lathe that is much bigger than mine, and instead of a chuck, it has a large diameter Planscheibe. Literally translated, that means plane disc, with the actual English term being faceplate. In a few minutes, we will also take a look inside a 3-jaw chuck, so that you will get a better idea of the actual differences. But what am I planning to do with this part that might be too big for any lathe I own? Well, I have been thinking about building a motorized rotary welding table for a while, and I guess I can build it almost completely from trash. This faceplate could be the centerpiece for that build. But first we will have to see if it can even be saved from what looks like years of corrosion. Throughout this video, frivolous amounts of penetrating oil will be used, but there's just no way around it. The jaws are all stuck, but we will have to remove them entirely from the plate to be able to actually get rid of the rust in the ways and threads. The 4 hex nuts are apparently M30 and would require size 46 impact sockets, which I don't have. In fact, I also don't have any wrench that fits them, and an adjustable spanner would only act as the proverbial nut lathe here. So I had to be a little creative. Last year I had bought a stockpile of military surplus gear, and among those things were big wrenches from both the West and East German army from the days of the Cold War. I will explain later in this video what my plans for all these wrenches are. The wrenches appeared to be mostly unused, but they had some rust from years of lying on warehouse shelves in a decommissioned military base. All rust was removed though, and every wrench got a fine layer of oil to preserve it for the future. This wrench here was made in East Germany and is actually kind of a piece of history. But since I have so many of them, I think it will be okay to modify one of them to be used with this faceplate in the future. It's just a few millimeters too narrow, and I will be so free to simply cut away these few millimeters of material. And of course, every single nut put up a fight. Something like this would be so much easier using the impact driver. But a socket this size is about 25 euros, and I might then never need it again. Sometimes you just have to do it the old-fashioned way. When the faceplate is in use, the 4 jaws can all be adjusted individually, which allows you to clamp irregular workpieces that differ from a perfect round shape. The adjustment is done with the 4 Acme screws that can be accessed from the sides, while the job of the nuts is to secure the jaws in place. Removing the nuts is key to freeing the jaws, because if they weren't stuck from corrosion, these jaws could just be removed together with the screws once the nuts have been taken off. In order to unscrew these trapezoidal screws, we would actually need a square socket. But all I have are standard metric hex sockets. Number 20 seems to fit it to some degree. It's not great though, and this will only work if the jaws aren't too stuck. I tried to push the jaws up and down and use some penetrating oil to wash off rust flakes that have been ground off by this rather brutal method. But I don't see any other way. After a lot of back and forth, I succeed in removing this first jaw assembly. And even though it might look nasty, this is totally salvageable. Jaw number 2 was already less willing to come off. I had to use a mallet to hammer the jaw up and down many times before I eventually succeeded with the same method I used with jaw 1. Jaw 3 was even worse. But in the end, the tested method worked once again. But this is when I started to work on the 4th jaw, and really started losing hope that the faceplate could ever be made to work again. The number 20 socket just rounded off the edges on that square screw head, and it did not move at all. And the next smaller size, number 19, was still just a little too tight. So I had no way of applying torque to the screw anymore. Trying to wiggle the jaw up and down with a hammer or mallet also did hardly anything at all. After a lot of very powerful blows, the jaw would maybe wiggle up and down a millimeter or two. I repeated that at least 20 times, but there seemed to be no improvement. Heating the jaw or the faceplate with a torch seemed pointless because of the immense thermal mass of the workpiece. So there was just no way around it. I had to find a way to apply enormous amount of torque to the screw, or I would be stuck as well. So I drove to a hardware store nearby, but of course they had no square-shaped sockets for people working on 80-year-old equipment. Who'd have thought? So it looked like I had to get creative once again here. So I bought a socket wrench number 19, you know, the one being just a little too tight. And then I started to heat this up in an oven that we found in a Scrapyard Repair-A-Thon video about 2 years ago. I waited about half an hour until it had heated up to about 900 degrees Celsius. The idea was to take one of the screws I had already removed from one of the jaws and reforge the number 19 socket to a nearly square shape. But the socket was cooling down too quickly, so I had to fire up the oxyacetylene torch to heat it up even more and make it more malleable. And the plan seemed to succeed. The new socket isn't exactly beautiful, but it should do the job. So the socket fit around that screw head, alright? But it shattered to pieces, and the screw hadn't moved at all. At this point I was wondering more and more if this entire thing was just a waste of my time, and I thought that I probably wouldn't be able to repair this faceplate. But I'm not a quitter, and it didn't take me long to figure out that I had made a mistake here. Mostly out of impatience, I had quenched the socket in cold water to make it cool down quicker. And while quenching can harden certain types of steel, it can also make a workpiece brittle, and I think that's what happened here. I had also worked on the steel when it wasn't really hot enough, so I got me a second 19mm socket and started all over again. This time I let it cool down very slowly, and the new socket fit very well, so I gave it a second try. But the screw did not budge. It didn't move at all. While I was going full steam ahead with the impact driver over and over again, the driver and the socket appeared to be overheating. After soaking everything in penetrating oil once again and repeating this process many times, the screw started moving just a little bit. Maybe 1 or 2 millimeters of wiggle room had been achieved. And I did it over and over again. But almost no progress was made, and I was pretty sure that the impact driver could die on me any minute now. So I started hammering the jaw with a hammer and a mallet again. As you can see, it was wiggling up and down a little bit, and this seemed to be my only way forward. I repeated this until I was almost completely exhausted. Next, I used some sandpaper to sand off some of the rust from the threads, flushing out the ground off particles with oil. I again drove the screw back and forth a few millimeters until I had finally made enough room to theoretically be able to punch the jaw out of the plate. Yes! And after finally getting that jaw out, the screw moved freely within the jaw. So the problem was not the screw or the threads inside the jaw, but a layer of rust between jaw and plate. I had won the battle though, after all. From here on out, the repair job was very straightforward and mostly a walk in the park. All of the smaller parts were cleaned in the ultrasonic cleaner. I also started to clean some of these scrap ball bearings here that I figured might come in handy when building that rotary welding table. I suspended them in gasoline to remove old grease before putting them in the ultrasonic cleaner as well. And after ultrasonic cleaning in soapy water, all the parts were scrubbed off as well before being submerged in citric acid. After a few hours I returned and turned the parts around so that all surfaces would have good contact with the acid, and the reaction was already in full force, as you can see by the bubbles rising and the yellow coloring of the acid. The morning after that, all parts were rinsed off with water and dried in an oven at very mild temperatures. After that, all parts were oiled. The rusty slots of the faceplate were cleaned with steel wool and sandpaper. The surfaces were then wire wheeled, and after greasing the contact surfaces and threads, the faceplate was reassembled. So let's take care of these chucks then as well. I got them at the same time when I bought a historic lathe more than a year ago. And I realize that many of you have been wondering if that lathe is ever going to be restored. Well, it's complicated, but here is the quick answer. When I got the lathe, I started the restoration job right away and made good progress. But some of the heavier parts, like the machine bed, require more than one person to move it around. The machine bed of the big lathe is actually so heavy that we needed 3 people to carry it around the workshop. And at the time when I started restoring the lathe, I had friends available who helped me at the shop when I really needed them. But unfortunately, just when I needed additional hands most, everyone was traveling around, not to be seen for months to come. So I just couldn't finish the project when I wanted to. I had to focus on other stuff that I could get finished alone instead. but it will still happen eventually. And these 3 chucks that came with it are the first step in getting back to finishing that project. The chucks are of different sizes. The small one is still holding a dead center, and judging by the Morse cone attached to its back, it was attached to a tailstock at the back of the lathe when needed. This chuck is much bigger, and I would call it a rather typical example of a mid-sized 3-jaw chuck of that era. The third chuck might look similar at first, but it is actually rather unusual, as we will see in a minute. The small and the big 3-jaw chuck are disassembled in the same way. By removing the plate on the back, inside this is what you will typically find. There's this complicated part that has a bevel gear on one side and a spiral-shaped gear on its back. The housing of the chuck has then 3 holes through which 3 small bevel gears are inserted. All 3 can be used to adjust the jaws. The chuck then usually comes with 2 different sets of jaws that can be replaced, and they can be used for different modes of clamping workpieces. Upon opening the back of the third chuck, we can see that it has a completely different mechanism. We will see more once we have removed all the rust. And the strategy here was exactly the same as with the faceplate. All parts were degreased and then suspended in citric acid. After that, dried and oiled. And here you can see all the beautiful parts laid out. With the rust gone, we learn more about the manufacturer and the age of the unusual chuck. It was made by the German company Forkart. The logo are 3 Fs in a circular pattern. On its surface we find 2 punch marks that let us know that the part was clearly made during World War II. I don't know if you ever watch videos by Ian over at Forgotten Weapons. In that case you have probably seen these types of punch marks before. They are stamps by the Heereswaffenamt in Berlin, which was the central research and development agency of the German army during World War II. Among arms collectors, they are simply known as Waffenamt stamps. To learn more about the actual meaning of the stamps, one would have to do further research. My first guess is that this chuck, or the lathe it belonged to, was somehow deemed important for the war effort and got the stamp at the manufacturing plant. If you know more about this stuff, feel free to send me an email. The general advantage of these 3-jaw chucks compared to the faceplate is, by the way, that you can center a workpiece by just turning one of the little bevel gears. No need to adjust the jaws individually every single time. One of their disadvantages, though, is that they are not suited for clamping non-circular workpieces. And this is what the parts look like that replace the more common spiral-shaped gear approach. Really interesting. Upon putting the chucks back together, they can be opened and closed rather effortlessly once again, and let us hope that we will see them back in action in the not too distant future. If you've been following this channel for a while, you might remember that about a year ago I restored a bunch of historic German army toolboxes, and I also offered some of them for sale at the end of 2021. It was a lot of work, but the demand was tremendous and I sold everything that I had at the time. Now, about a year later, I finally managed to restore another batch, and here is your second chance to get your hands on one of these boxes. Maybe as a Christmas present for yourself or for a loved one. So here is a sample of some of the toolboxes that are currently up for grabs, and as you can see, they are of different styles, different vintages. Some of them might be 50 or 60 years old, maybe even older. Many of them still have military markings, some maybe with German text, others with just numbers on them, and they also have signs of wear, of course. Some have a little more rust than others. There might be bent parts here and there, but a lot of work went into all of them already. Mostly cleaning them up, removing old stickers and tapes, that had been applied all around them over the course of many decades, and really of them really looked very nasty when I first got them. But I would say that they are now in acceptable condition. Now all of them have the TPAI sticker, and they also come with a few extras. So all of the boxes will be delivered in bundles, and the first item that comes with every box is a wrench from the stockpiles of the East German Army, only that the one you will get looks much less used than this one. I've been abusing this in this video, but the others I have are practically unused. I will also include an assortment of stickers and one patch, and I don't know if you're aware of it, but this is a design that I came up with myself about a year ago. And the last thing that I will include is also a historic postcard from East Germany. So these are actually 50 or 40 odd years old, and they will actually include a personal message. I might also in some of the boxes include another surprise item. So yes, I can't guarantee that you will be able to get one, because a lot of people have contacted me last time around, and it's probably going to be like this again. And if you send an email to inventordonations@gmail.com, you have a chance of getting one. I'll send you an offer. Please don't forget to tell me where you live so that I can tell you how much the shipping cost will be. And also, please don't expect me to answer right away. It might take a few days, even a week, before I can answer you, because there are always so many emails that, well, considering all the work that I have to do here on a daily basis, it will just take time. So don't take it personally if it takes a few days or even a week for me to respond. And just let me say it right away, especially if you live in North America or Australia, this will take a few weeks to fulfill. I think it's realistic though that you will have your stuff by Christmas, but don't expect anything much quicker than that. So as always, I hope that you liked this episode. And if that was the case, please give the video a like. It might sound silly, but it is your encouragement and engagement that keeps me motivated to make more of these videos. And if you want to support the future production of these videos more actively, you can also make a donation via PayPal. Links for that down in the video description, or become a supporter on Patreon under patreon.com/tpai. See you soon.